What's going on, everybody? Welcome back to the channel, and in today's video we're going to be talking about a new film coming to the horror streaming service Shudder, and that film is called Daddy's Head. Written and directed by Benjamin Barfoot, this film stars people like Julia Brown, Rupert Turnbull, Nathaniel Martello-White, and more. And before we get too far into this video, as I typically like to do, I'd like to say a big thanks to those kind folks over at Shudder for sending me over an early screener for this film. You guys can catch this film, Daddy's Head, premiering on their streaming service starting on October 11th, and it actually just recently premiered over at Fantastic Fest, so there are a few people who have been able to check this out and log it on Letterboxd, get their thoughts out there, but I am very happy to have gotten the chance to check it out before it gets its big wide release, and I look forward to hearing the various opinions on this. So if you're watching this after you saw it on Shudder and that's what brought you here, start typing down below. Let me know, did you like this movie? Did you not like this movie? Because I do think this is a film, like most films, that can go either way. Now let's get into what this movie is all about, and then we'll get into my thoughts on the movie. The movie opens up and we're introduced to the characters of Laura and Isaac, a stepmother and her stepson, and unfortunately the husband in this situation, the father to Isaac, has just passed away. We learn pretty quickly that the two of them don't necessarily have the greatest relationship. The stepmother-stepson dynamic here is not great. Isaac unfortunately now has lost his father, but had lost his mother previously. He wasn't a fan of this stepmother who came in to kind of replace his mom anyway, so now being left with no parents and having this stepmother he doesn't enjoy, and she finds herself in a weird spot where now she has to be the guardian to this kid who wants nothing to really do with her. As the movie starts to progress, though, they both start to kind of experience some strange things, some visions and some sort of nightmares that eventually lead to the visitation of some sort of eerie creature that actually resembles the boy's recently deceased father. And that's all I'll say when it comes down to the base premise here. Throughout the course of the film, you have some great cinematography, a lot of really great shots that are really claustrophobic in nature, some great sound design, and some great atmospheric music that oftentimes adds to the overall aesthetic and tone of this film. I really enjoyed the overall look and the feel of this film and the scenery that they use in this film. A lot of the locations used lent itself to giving this film a really interesting look. I like the way this film looks and feels, and in a lot of ways I was impressed with how this film was made. On top of that, you have pretty solid performances with, I think, the young boy in the film played by Rupert Turnbull, Isaac, being the standout in terms of performances. But I think for the most part, the entire cast does good here. And this film, in a lot of ways, is a chamber piece taking place in one singular location. But there are a couple of scenes here and there where we're in different places. And it does have a fairly small cast. But I think the film does a good enough job of kind of giving all those cast members something to do in the film for you to at least understand who they are, where it doesn't feel like they're just kind of 100% throwaway characters. With that said, though, if I'm completely and utterly honest, I was not a fan of this film. While I found it to be very well made, very well performed at times, and having a pretty interesting premise with some really solid and creepy moments, I found that the film never really truly executed on its premise. Now, before I get into that, what I'll say is that I do think that this film had some good ideas. The idea of this creature visiting these two in this really grief-heavy time in their life and resembling this young boy's father and kind of deceiving him was definitely interesting. And the creature that you see in this film, though he is seen sparingly throughout the course of the film, honestly really piqued my interest as a big fan of monsters and creatures and eerie kind of elements when it comes down to movies, especially when it comes to practical effects and different things that kind of give, you know, that movie a tangible, creepy vibe. I was definitely intrigued anytime this creature was on screen. And I'll be honest in saying that there are some sequences here that I think could have been downright scary had they really executed on them well. But there are some eerie, creepy moments that might freak some people out simply around this creature. But I say all that to also kind of just jump back to what I was just saying, where I don't necessarily feel like this film fully lived up to its potential. While there are some creepy, eerie moments in this film, especially around said creature, like I said, he's kind of used sparingly throughout the course of the film. It's not necessarily a situation where you have this creature showing up very, very often. You don't really get to see it too often. And so a lot of time throughout the course of this film is just kind of slow dialogue, tackling grief, having these characters like each other and not like each other in certain sequences, working through what's going on, thinking something is going on, maybe seeing something off in the distance, and a lot of scenery shots. And honestly, that's what a lot of this film felt like to me. A lot of fluff, a really interesting premise that almost I think would have been better in a short film, but a film that ultimately just felt overly long, even though it really isn't that long of a film. And that's where I found myself struggling with the film. As I was watching it, I was impressed by a lot of it, but I just found myself wondering, why didn't they really go further with this? There are moments where we have jump scares or some sort of creepy sequence that will go down with this creature I've mentioned, only for it to cut to the next morning and our characters to just be waking up and going about their day until we eventually get to another creepy sequence that I oftentimes felt was cut short. Which just leads into my thoughts by the time we get to the end of the film, where it just feels like the movie just kind of ends. It's one of those movies where you're like, man, they had something really eerie and creepy here. They had a really good idea that could have done something awesome and left the viewer feeling really uncomfortable by the time the movie was over. And while there are those moments that kind of show you what this film could have been, there was this element of watching it by the time I got to the end and the credits started rolling that just had me like, what? I watched this film with my wife, and the two of us were pretty interested to see where the film was going to go based on the last 10 or 15 minutes, but then the last 2 or 3 minutes just literally kind of undercut what had just happened and ultimately just kind of left us feeling like, ah, man, that just did not execute on the premise that was being built here, and majority of the film just felt like it dragged. It felt like it never really took itself to the next level, and it just kind of was one of those movies you're like, okay, cool, something's happening. It seems like we're going to kind of get somewhere. And then it just didn't. And then you're like, okay, this seems eerie, this seems creepy, something's happening here, we're gonna get to the next level. And then it just didn't. And there was a lot of stopping and starting and stopping and starting. And it just left me in this weird place where I was, again, impressed by the filmmaking, impressed by the performances, but more often than not, frustrated by the characters and just frustrated by the way that this film played out. There wasn't really much to it. I think that is just one of those things where you see the potential and it just becomes a forgettable horror film. And I think, unfortunately, Shudder can be that sometimes for me. They're a platform that sometimes has some of the best horror films, some of the most inventive horror films, but then they can also have stuff that just feels like conventional missed opportunities, and that's exactly what this feels like to me. Something that had an interesting premise and had some creep factor, but never really did anything for it to be something that's long-lasting and memorable. Something that makes me want to tell you guys, dude, you need to see this movie. I love telling people about horror, and it was not this one. Daddy's Head is going to be hitting the horror streaming service Shudder on October 11th, and I look forward to hearing various opinions on this. I'm sure I will be not the only person who dislikes this film, but I'm sure there will be some people who enjoy it. So whether you enjoyed it or didn't enjoy it, leave some comments down below. What did I miss if you really enjoyed the film? Or do you agree with me and you feel like this film had the potential, had the solid filmmaking, had the solid acting, and had that creep factor, but just never fully landed? I'm definitely curious to hear what everybody has to say about it, so hit that like button if you guys enjoyed the video, comment your thoughts, subscribe for more videos, and I'll see you beautiful people in the next one. Bye-bye.